One of the most infamous events in American history is the Salem Witch Trials. They have inspired countless historical fiction and horror stories. But the exact truth of what happened continues to elude modern historians. Did the girls eat rotten ergot, causing fits and hallucinations? Were they genuinely sick, pressured and frightened by doctors mentioning witchcraft into accusing their neighbors? Were there political forces at work, manipulating the trials for their own personal gain? It's impossible to know the full story, but likely the answer was a mixture of all of the above. What if the Salem Witch Trials were entirely orchestrated by a few ambitious men seeking power and control? What would such a story look like? In 1689, Reverend Samuel Parris strolls into Salem village, eager to investigate his new parish. A sugar plantation owner who had joined the ministry a little later in life, he hoped to have a stable new career. But Salem village was anything but stable. Known for its contentious residents and constant infighting, the village had churned through 3 ministers in 15 years. By the time Parris arrived, the town was already divided into bitter factions, each group unwilling to bend for the good of the community. At first, Parris tries to calm the town as best he can. He delivers fiery sermons, demanding strict adherence to Puritan values and attempting to assert his authority. Yet his tenure proved no more peaceful than those of his predecessors. By October 1691, the townspeople, squabbling over their current decision for minister as usual, decide to withhold his salary. When this had happened to 3 other ministers, they had simply left to find a new parish. But Samuel Parris was not a man to be so easily pushed aside. As Parris broods over his predicament, an unexpected solution appears in the form of Thomas Putnam, one of the most influential figures in Salem village. Putnam has his own grievances. A series of bitter land disputes with rival families have left him frustrated and vengeful. He wants to expand his holdings and settle old scores, but he would prefer finding a means to do so without openly declaring war on his neighbors. When he approached Parris with a scheme to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, the Reverend was skeptical at first. Yet, as Putnam outlined his plan, Parris began to see the possibilities. This was not just a chance to regain his salary. It was an opportunity to solidify his power and enrich himself in the process. By December 1691, the plot is fully in motion. Parris approaches his 9-year-old daughter Betty and his 11-year-old niece Abigail Williams. He explains that he needs their help with something very important, a task that would determine if they could stay in Salem village. The girls, eager to please the stern man that they both feared and respected, agreed without question. A few days later, they began to scream and writhe on the floor, clutching their throats and babbling incoherently. Their fits are loud and frightening, drawing the immediate attention of the household. It has not even been a week before the news has spread throughout all of Salem village. Members of the community come to see the children every day. The town doctor is baffled, as outwardly nothing seems to be the matter with either of them. Finally, after a month of failed treatments, he timidly suggests that perhaps this is all due to witchcraft. Putnam and Parris are thrilled that their plan is finally coming to fruition. The townspeople, caught up in all the excitement, have completely forgotten that they wanted Parris to leave. The first accusations are carefully chosen. Tituba, Parris's enslaved woman, is an obvious target. Her foreign origins and mysterious traditions made her an easy scapegoat. Along with Tituba, the girls accuse Sarah Good, a destitute woman who rarely attended church, and Sarah Osborne, a widow embroiled in a land dispute with the Putnams. None of these women had strong allies in the village, making them perfect initial victims. As Tituba is a slave, Parris simply beats her until she confesses. Tituba even claims that Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were helping her, and describes witchcraft that she says she had learned in her own country. With that, the village erupts in panic. The accusations spread like wildfire. The community, already fractured and suspicious, descends into chaos as neighbors begin turning on one another. For Reverend Parris and Thomas Putnam, the plan is working perfectly. Parris regains the town's support and is able to seize land from some of the accused, increasing his wealth and influence. Putnam, meanwhile, uses the chaos to target his rivals, accusing those who stand in the way of his land claims. He is able to completely disappear several families he had been fighting with. The trials become a weapon, and the girls' hysterical fits become a means to destroy enemies under the guise of rooting out evil. By the spring of 1692, the trials have begun in earnest. Hundreds of people are accused of witchcraft, and the courts, led by Judge William Stoughton, proves more than willing to condemn them based on spectral evidence and the girls' testimonies. The first execution comes on June the 10th, when Bridget Bishop is hanged. Her trial is a spectacle, with the afflicted girls screaming and writhing if she walks too close. To the villagers, it is undeniable proof of her guilt. Parris and Putnam feel on top of the world. They have been expertly guiding the proceedings behind the scenes. Parris even arranges for his predecessor, Reverend Burroughs, to be accused of witchcraft, and he is transported all the way from Maine to be held for trial. His execution is particularly chilling, as he flawlessly recites the Lord's Prayer before being hanged, a feat that was supposedly impossible for a witch. The town and surrounding area becomes more and more involved in the trials. Trials where the only proof of these witches is girls pointing at them and shuddering when touched by one. The townspeople who denounce the proceedings as unfair or prejudiced soon find themselves called out as witches too. Neighbors and old friends turn on one another. No one is safe, and so no one dares to shut it down. Even Putnam and Parris begin to fear that they are losing their grip on the situation. Governor William Phips, who has been away in Maine negotiating peace treaties with indigenous tribes, returns to Massachusetts to find the colony in turmoil. Horrified by the accounts of the trials, he attempts to intervene and release several accused witches. But Parris and Putnam have a contingency plan in place. They have already ensured that the afflicted girls accuse Phips' wife, Mary Spencer Phips, of witchcraft. She is dragged to prison right before Governor Phips returns. The move is a masterstroke. When the governor tries to shut down the trials, his actions are dismissed as biased, as everyone can see his wife was just arrested. His credibility is shattered, and the trials continue unchecked. Mary is brought to trial before her appointed date to prevent the governor from interfering, and overwhelmed with the proceedings, she breaks down and admits her guilt. She is spared because she repents of her supposed witchcraft, but the governor is completely discredited by anyone from around Salem, and the trials spread farther and farther afield. For the first time since Putnam's plan was put into action, he begins to feel truly alarmed. He is no longer in control anymore. Too many people are accusing each other, and Parris and Putnam can only watch as their creation takes on a vicious life of its own. Before long, his wife is accused as a witch and thrown into prison. Desperate to save her, he publicly denounces the trials, only to find himself ignored. No one is safe anymore, not even those who had started it all. No one believes him, just like no one believed the governor. Soon, the death toll has risen to 50, then to 100, in just a matter of months. Judge Stoughton still seems perfectly happy to condemn all non-repentant witches to death. Back in Boston, Governor Phips knows that he must do something to end the madness. Too many innocent people are being put to death. So he takes drastic action and calls up the militia. He carefully selects men who do not believe in the trials and marches to Salem to put an end to the bloody dealings. Parris stands before the courthouse as they arrive, screaming that they are trying to put an end to the work of God, that these men must all be witches too. A member of the militia knocks him aside, and shocked townsfolk stream out of the courthouse to help him. Several townspeople are killed as the militia fight their way into the courthouse. Judge Stoughton, on his way to announcing that the 128th and 129th witches to pass through his court were to be executed, is arrested and brought to Boston to answer for the crime of operating a vigilante court. The court is finally dissolved. With that, the nightmare of the trials is over. But the damage has already been done. Over 100 witches have been executed, and dozens more have died in prison while they waited to plead their case. Families have been torn apart, and the community is left to grapple with the brutal aftermath of its hysteria. Some do try to rebuild their lives in Salem Village, though trust is a hard thing to regain. Many leave, unable to forgive others or themselves for the blood that had been shed there. The governor has had to fight his own people just to bring order, leaving behind its own bloody legacy. The Putnams got the land they wanted, but at the cost of Anne Putnam's life. She dies soon after being released from prison, and a heartbroken Thomas dies soon afterwards, leaving their 10 children to fend for themselves on the blood-soaked great estate that he had fought so hard to claim. The Putnam children are shunned as they grow up, and eventually they sell the land their father won for them and move away to live with relatives in towns where they are not judged so harshly. Reverend Parris has grown fat from profit and is soon driven out of town, an extremely wealthy but hated figure. He retreats to Maine, where he lives out his days in relatively luxurious obscurity. In 1702, a day of public fasting and repentance is declared to atone for the tragedies of 1692. To this day, on June the 10th every year, the citizens of Salem Village meet in the town square to recite the names of those killed all those years ago. The Salem Witch Trials remain one of the darkest chapters in American history. In the real events, confusion and fear were the primary drivers, with opportunism playing a secondary role. This version of events follows what might have happened if the trials had been deliberately orchestrated. A grim reminder of the dangers of power, greed, and manipulation in times of uncertainty. What other what-ifs in history would you like to explore? Comment below and make sure to like and subscribe.